Hey everybody, this is Lisa Alford with SoJax Realty. So glad you could join us today. We are having a great discussion today with EOKeefe with SWB Mortgage and with Rodney.Quiles with Comparion Insurance Agency. And all three of us have a lot of experience in our fields, and we would like to help you out as best we can with any, with the most common questions that we hear buyers asking these days. So we thought we'd put this information out there, and hopefully it's helpful. But if you have questions, please feel free to call each one of us directly. So let's get started with Eddie. I know you had some questions for Rodney. Do you want to go ahead and ask the first couple of questions there?
Sure. Thanks, Lisa, for having us. And insurance is one of the big things on everybody's mind these days, especially what we've seen over the last 12 to 24 months. We've got Rodney here, who's awesome, and has helped many of our borrowers find a policy that fits them. But the first question I have is kind of an industry overview, where we've been and where we are currently. Maybe some of the ins and outs of the insurance world. Rodney, what do you have to say about that?
Well, first off, I want to thank you both for having me on. Thank you for the time, the platform, and the conversation. I think this is important, not only for us, right, and what we do, but just for consumers in general to know what's really happening. So thank you guys. You asked me what's going on, so I think I speak for most people when I say that what's going on is a little bit chaotic. We went through that tough period of COVID. Everybody knows what that was like, and coming out of it now, I think we're just still seeing the remnants of what those policies did back then. So a little bit of a rocky, I'd say, last year and a half, 2 years, but I'm confident, I'm optimistic of what the future looks like for us.
Oh, very cool.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, good.
And
Any other questions you had, Eddie?
well, so with the industry overview, what kind of changes for state regulations do you see coming down the pipeline that's going to help with the insurance world?
There's a ton of changes, but I think before we even get to the changes, there's things that happen in our past that obviously haven't helped. I think the main culprit is the severe weather events we've been having. I know folks, just think of a severe weather event as just a Category 5 hurricane, especially here in Florida, right? We're so used to seeing, little tropical storms and such, but even those smaller storms and those severe weather events, even minimal flooding, causes huge impacts, specifically here in Florida, where we have just an outrageous number of flood insurance claims. But to bring it back to what you just asked, Eddie, what's being changed? In the last year and a half, our governor here in the state of Florida has done a good job of passing legislation that's going to ease some of the pressure, not only some of the pressure on consumers themselves, right? Not just us in our pockets, but across the board. It'll affect carriers in a way where they'll ultimately make more of a profit, and they'll ultimately protect themselves better when it comes to lawsuits and such stemming from claims, and those losses. But I'd love to get into some of the helpful tips that somebody could use, when they're going out and looking at these things, looking at quotes and all that fun stuff. Yeah.
Okay, question on the regulation change. So with the regulation change, we saw a time period where companies were pulling out like crazy, from the insurance world. Now with these new changes, are they starting to come back? Are we going to see, like, say, Farm Bureau and some of those other bigger companies come back into the insurance world?
That's a great question. I'll tell you, um, we're still seeing some carriers leave, and so that tells me I don't think we're at the point where we're bringing back those carriers that have left in the last 3, 4, 5 years. Um, I'll give you an example, and I don't speak on their behalf, but a carrier like maybe a Travelers. Travelers, they were part of our panel, part of many agents' panels, for many years. And about 2.5, 3 years ago, they decided, hey, maybe Florida isn't for us. So a carrier like Travelers, they kind of set the precedent for the others. The others being let's just, I'll start naming some of them, but your St. John's, your UPCs, your People's Trust, they'll set the precedent for those guys, just because of who they are, the name they carry, and, well, the amount of policies that they hold, right?
Mhm.
Just like a State Farm and your AAA's of the world, right? So an example with Travelers is, I haven't heard rumblings that they're looking to come back to Florida just yet. But I could see that in the next, I would say in the next 2 years, I could see them becoming healthier in our market and seeing it more for the profit more than for the loss, like they're seeing it right now.
And okay, yeah, no, that's I guess the more the merrier. That's what's going
Yeah,
to really bring down the cost of insurance is competition. Just
yeah,
like in lenders and
absolutely
everything else.
right. And I want to piggyback on that, Eddie, because it might seem like I'm gloom and doom, right? With some of these, oh, carriers are leaving, may not come back, but there's the positive side to it, and it's the new carriers that are coming in. Right. There's carriers that maybe they were an old carrier, right, and they rebranded and changed their book or changed their outlook on it, their branding, and went forward with that new name. Again, I don't speak for this carrier, but they are part of our panel, and they've come in fresh. Slide Insurance.
Okay.
Slide Insurance is a great example of a good company coming in and helping fill a void. Slide has been around. I think this is their third year under that name. They are I want to say about 7 states, so they're not just Florida, which helps them take on more risk in Florida, which is always a good thing for us. Um, but they've assumed a lot of Citizens policies. You guys are familiar with Citizens and what
Mhm.
they do in the process of those takeouts, right? That we're trying to take folks out of Citizens and place them in the private market. Slide has been extremely helpful in doing that. So we're thankful, excuse me, as agents to have a carrier coming and start assuming some of those risks. So that's just one of them. There's many that have come in. Not as many as have left in the last couple of years, but slowly and surely we have seen an uptick in new carriers coming aboard.
Okay. I mean, we have seen, premiums drop, I would say really just in the last 6 months. It's
Yeah.
been, we've been seeing the premiums drop. Hasn't been as hectic as it's been. But that's a good question, about Citizens. And, people hear Citizens, but don't really know what Citizens is. And, tell us a little bit about that's the state-run insurance carrier,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, Eddie. Great question again. Citizens, like you just mentioned, they are state ran. So they're not private. They're more of a public company. And because they're state ran, they're sticklers, right? So they like all the I's, dotted, all the T's crossed. But it's important to understand this. Citizens is the insurer of last resort, right? We never want to assume or say that Citizens is there to help you right away. They were put in place a very long time ago, way before my time, to help mitigate folks that just couldn't find private insurance, whether it be there's an issue with the roof, or the roof may be aged out of that program with that particular carrier. Well, now Citizens has to step in and make sure that home has insurance. So um, I for one will say I appreciate that the state of Florida has maintained Citizens over the last 30, 40 years. And I look forward to them being around and being there to help folks for the next 30, 40 years. That's primarily why we have the Slide Insurance of the world coming in and assuming some of those risks from Citizens, is to make sure that they're there for the long run.
Hmm, okay, good. Well, that's all the questions I have. I know, Lisa, you've got a few that you'd like answered.
I do. I do. So, in preparing for this, I was really kind of thinking more of the newcomers to our area because we have had a huge influx of people, as y'all know, coming from other states into Florida. And I expect that that trend is going to keep on continuing at least for a while. But I know that a lot of people, like myself, my husband and I moved from North Carolina a few years ago, and I mean, I've been an agent since 2012, so I'm kind of familiar with what people are usually, asked about when they're getting their insurance. But it was just striking to me about the rules on roofs. And at that time, if your roof was over 10 years old, you basically couldn't get insurance. And your plumbing had to be within, a certain age range too. And I'd never dealt with that before. And I imagine that a lot of people coming in from other states, I mean, unless they're buying a house where they're coming from, unless they were buying a house that the roof might be falling apart or the plumbing might be springing a leak or something, it just is not something that they've had to deal with before. So I wanted to check with you and find out what's the skinny on it these days, because I know some things have changed and that the governor has made some changes, but I really don't know the details of that. And I'm sure that newcomers to the area would like to know those details as well.
Thank you, Lisa. No, that's this is very important. These are golden nuggets, if you will. Um, and what I'll do, Lisa, if you don't mind, is we'll cover. You had mentioned specifically the roof and plumbing, but I'd like to kind of go through the four facets really that insurance carriers look at, right? That are important or critical, and without them in good working order, it's very hard to find a good spot for those risks for the homes that folks are buying. When you look at roofing, um, in the insurance world industry, specifically here in Florida, right? I'm not going to speak to other states because we're here in Florida. This is what we enjoy.
Sure.
This is where we're at. But roofing in Florida, it hasn't changed from I think where you just said it was at, which is about 10 years. Now, when we talk years on a roof, we're talking from when that roof was installed to present day. Um, but even then, more so, there's also the question of, hey, what material is that roof? Because that does play a role, right? So I'll make it as easy as possible. If you've got a shingled roof at about 10 to 12 years, those carriers start getting a little timid and they start looking for the replacement of that roof. Now, mind you, when they go out and install the roof, it is good for 25 years, as they say, right? The roofer or the contractor, whoever it may be. But to carriers, they see it as, hey, if that roof is at 12 years and there's a claim at year 13 and above, then we're stuck paying for a brand new roof when that roof had already lost more than 50% of its value. So when it comes to roofing, again, when you're looking at shingled roofs at 10 to 12 years, that's the sweet spot. That's where you want to really start preparing yourself to make that replacement in order to fit most, if not all, carriers' guidelines, right? Now, that's not to say, hey, if you're at year 13, 14, 15, we can't help you. That's not the case at all. We have plenty of options as agents, not just myself. I'm sure there's other agents that have plenty of options to offer coverage for shingled roofs that are older than those 12, 13 plus years. Now, if you're talking a tile metal slate roofing surface, that's guys like us, we get all excited because we know that that's a good roof for the next 25 years in our books. So preferably if you see a roof that has those materials, certainly something to get excited about if the house is what you're looking for.
Okay. Very good. And you had mentioned there were four facets, so
Yeah.
would you like to go ahead and cover the other three?
Yeah, certainly. I'll go to plumbing next, just because again you had mentioned plumbing.
Right.
Um, I I gotta say, as an agent doing this is my 14th year. I want to say, uh, plumbing has become a critical underwriting factor. So I'm glad we're talking about plumbing. Um, Realistically, it's very simple. You certainly do not want to have any kind of polybutylene, and I know that's but if you ever hear poly or polybutylene in the home, just know that must be replaced. To my knowledge, there's maybe one carrier out of the 140 plus that insure in Florida that will take polybutylene. So you certainly don't want to
Wow.
put yourself in that corner of having to find that one carrier that will insure a home with polybutylene. Water heaters. Water heaters, just realize, folks, water heaters at 15 years, they start to have issues. So that is about the cap for most insurance carriers. There are exceptions to certain rules that we'll talk about today, and most of those are exceptions created by, let's say, a citizens, right? Because they're the insurer, excuse me, of last resort. Sometimes some of those guidelines will be lessened, or we'll look the other way as long as things are in good working order. So that's important to remember. Um, if you see a home installed with PEX, PEX, which is a very common material nowadays in plumbing, Most carriers are going to ask that it's 2009 or later. Now, why that is, it's because prior to 2009, they were using a certain material for those PEX lines that just would burst. And again, not trying to scare anybody or seem gloom and doom, but that's just the facts. They were creating a lot of claims off of that plumbing supply material. So PEX, if you see it in the house, just hopefully it's 2009 or newer. And if it's not, certainly call a plumber and they can get out there.
And the way to know that it's PEX is the blue and red line, correct?
Yes, yep,
Yeah,
that's love that, Lisa. Another
right.
way is, and I know I didn't get a chance to hit on this, but I'm sure we will soon, is get your inspections done right away.
Mm-hmm.
It's super, super critical, not only for you as the buyer or seller or whatever party you may be, but when you call around and go to get quotes and you have those inspections, that process goes from being uh, a week, process of, hey, let me get the inspection, et cetera, to it being a 48 hour, call back to you with the quote, accurate quote, et cetera. And as agents, it gives us the opportunity to see that 4-point inspection and call out those things that we may see that maybe no one else in the transaction was aware of. So very important, very
Good
important.
point. Yep.
Yeah. I'll move on to electrical. Electrical, it, it's going to actually be easier, I think, than plumbing. You stay away if you see anything with cloth wiring and knob and tube. Probably something we need to mitigate. Knob and tube you don't see very often, but you do see it specifically, in downtown areas. Our historic district here in Jacksonville has a couple homes that do have knob and tube. You don't see it often, but if you see it, I would certainly mitigate that. Um, Cloth wiring. There are different types of cloth wiring. All of them are not the greatest, right? If you see cloth wiring and you have the chance to mitigate that prior to closing, would certainly recommend that. That'll open up your options with all the carriers. Cloth wiring, as to my knowledge, right now there's about 4 carriers in the state of Florida that will take it. Again, Citizens being one of those, being that they're the carrier of last resort, that they have to open their doors there. But again, cloth wiring, it can be remediated, right? We can put some kind of connectors at the end to help mitigate that issue. But if possible, certainly replace. That would be my suggestion there. Um, the other thing to stay away from as far as electrical would be these four manufacturers. When you talk that electrical panel, that famous little panel that you can't stand in front of, you can't put anything in front of. You do not want to see Challenger, Zanesco, Stablock, and Federal Pacific panels. And I'm going to hit on why.
Okay.
Most carriers back in the 80s, 90s, they did tests on all those panels and even early 2000s. And they found that those four seem to cost the most money to deal with, whether it stems from a claim from a fire, whether it stems from burning wires, or the actual panel just catching fire and just not being operable. Those four just didn't do well back in the day. And so most carriers, when they see that manufacturer, it is just a good old no from them. So if you see those, I would certainly, again, try to mediate that. Am I saying that there's no options? No, there are still options out there. I would say with those panels, you still have about 8 to 10 carriers that could still take on the risk, but something to certainly think about.
Rodney,
And
do
I'll,
you know what age range the houses would be that have those panels? Like what years
um,
they were built in?
I, great question. I've seen them. I've seen them really. I mean, they go as young. I'm saying this backwards, but they go as young as maybe even 10 years ago, Lisa. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
one of those.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, and a lot of times, what that is your electrician or your general contractors. They had just excess surplus amounts of those panels, so they just kept them in stock and just keep installing them as the years go by to get rid of it instead of having to buy new panels and then go about it that way. So um, if it's up to me, I wish they would just, say, hey, stop installing them. But I understand that, there's still some folks that will install those you know, and they'll be happy with them.
Okay. Very good. Any other points that
I would say as far as the condition of the home and those four items, the last one we haven't covered, it's just your AC unit or your HVAC units or heating, air conditioning. It's important to note there, just it's always got to be in good working order. We certainly don't ever want to see leakage, whether it's at the actual unit or coming out of the vents. Um, Most carriers are okay if you do have window units. I know that's very common in Florida, especially to supplement that primary unit. I've seen that done. Just again, very important there. Just always has to be in good working order. So the drain line has to be doing okay and all that. There's got to be no frayed wiring. Sometimes you'll see folks installing custom ACs, right? Custom window units, and you'll see some frayed wiring. So be careful there. And lastly, let's see here. No, that's all I got. I was just thinking
Okay.
about HVACs and if there was anything else to add, but that one is very simple. Just good
All
working
right.
order and we'd be good there.
There is one other question I thought of while we were talking.
Mhm.
Solar panels. I hear of
Oh.
people are either all for it or all against it. And I know I have heard before that can create nightmares when it comes to insurance. So can you give us the details on that?
Yeah, certainly. Again, great question. I love these questions. You guys are good. um, Solar panels. We as agents, as insurance carriers, agencies, we don't mind them at all. And by that I mean it's if you have them, great. We'll find a way to insure them. If you don't, well, I'm sure just like me, we wish we could have them, right? Why not? What I will say on solar panels is very important to know what type of system is either on the home already or what type of system you're having installed. It's very important to know how it's going to get attached to that home. If it's attached directly to the home, then the agent needs to know that, right? Because we need to know, hey, is this part of coverage A, which is the dwelling itself? Is it coverage B, other structures, right? Is it something that isn't permanently attached to the home? So my advice there, Lisa, would be just make sure you have all that information.
Hmm.
Whether it's already installed or it's being installed, that you know how many tiles or squares are being installed, right? If there's a generator that's getting attached to it, we need to know that, right?
Yeah.
So just being able to provide all the information you have on that system to your insurance agent, even if it's for just the quote, is critical because it's going to tell us how we need to list it on the policy.
Okay. So the biggest negatives that I have heard is if it's installed, if the panels are installed on the roof, does that cause any issues?
No, no.
Okay.
But again, good question. No, if it's professionally installed, obviously, um,
Yeah.
no issues. No, I have seen some where install means taking away maybe two or three shingle tiles, and then they have to go ahead and install and then fix around that or seal. I have seen that done, and that's okay. But again, the biggest thing there is just letting the agent know, hey, how is it actually attached to the structure, if at all? Because then we'll know, okay, how does it get insured, and how will the carrier, excuse me, pay out if something should happen to the panels.
Okay, great. But it doesn't hurt your premium or your chances of getting insurance at all, right?
Not at all. No.
Awesome.
Mm-mm.
Okay. And then the last thing we had all kind of talked about before is, again, new homeowners or even existing, homeowners that are just buying their next home. Everybody's always looking for tips, especially in these days and times, to save money. So what
Mhm.
other additional tips could you give for somebody who is looking for a home as to what to look for in that home, or maybe even things that they can add on themselves to help lower their premiums?
Yeah, no, Lisa, I'll start with this. We live in a special little state called Florida, right? We're surrounded by a lot of water, and I too love that water. But just know the closer you live to that water, the more it's going to cost to insure that home. And that's not a myth. That's fact. So
Now, does that
it
specifically mean the ocean or the river?
oh I would say the ocean, the ocean. No, but the river does play a role, right? When you
Right.
talk flood zones, funny enough. But I would say just the closer you are to the coastline, just know and expect that you could one run into issues insuring the home, or just trouble, right? as far as getting a quote back right away, just because it is more risk. And then it's also important to expect a higher premium. Right now, I would say the state of Florida, your average annual premium, and I'm not talking coastline, just across the state, it's closer to $2,300 now. Last year, I want to say it was closer to $2,000. So you have seen that creep up, but when you're talking coastal waters, now you're talking closer to $4,000 to $4,500
Mm.
annually. So almost double anytime you're within 5 miles of the coastline. So very important to know. Um, and then you had asked me for more tips and tricks for folks coming in. I mentioned this, but I'll mention it again. Make sure you're getting those inspections done right away. Again, the faster your agent or prospective agent has a chance to see that forward point in that wind mitigation, the faster we can get that quote back to folks. The faster we can determine, hey, what's the best fit. And most agents, just like myself, we don't just write for that one carrier. We have many. So again, seeing those inspections up front just makes that process just much more smoother.
Okay. And I assume things like smoke detectors, CO detectors, fire extinguishers, those kinds of things are all good and helpful to get reductions as well, right?
Yeah, no, you mentioned helpful and for reductions, but they're also a requirement nowadays. At minimum, we do need to see that the home has a deadbolt, right? We need to know that if something were to happen and somebody does try to bust in that door, that we at least have that minimal protection in place. So I'm glad you bring this up. Fire extinguishers, certainly at minimum, you got to have two, right? I'm not no fire marshal, so no one no one come after me for this, but you got to have at least I would say 2 to 3, one on each side of the house and one always in the kitchen. That would certainly be my advice. Um, Sprinkler systems, if folks insuring maybe townhomes or condos, I've seen some older homes, right, have sprinkler systems. Let your agent know that certainly is a reduction on your insurance, right? There's two types of systems, but either or, you're gonna get a reduction. So, Lisa, I can't thank you enough for bringing that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll expand on that. Alarm systems. Very important. If you have an opportunity to install an alarm prior to moving in, please do so. That will greatly reduce your cost. On average, that discount is anywhere from 10 to 12 to 15%. So it's extremely important. If you have the opportunity to install a home security system, please, I would certainly do that. That you'll see that reflected on your insurance costs.
Good. Good deal. Okay. All right. Well, have we covered everything, guys?
I think so.
Okay.
A lot of
Well,
information.
I'm sorry.
It's a lot of information.
And that was a lot of information. Rodney, you have been so super helpful. Thank you. This is,
My pleasure.
again, questions that we hear all the time, and it's going to be great to be able to refer them to this video and say, this will answer all your questions. And if not, call Rodney.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to mention that if anyone has a question, big or small, you do this so long. I'm in this for everyone else. Not in this for me. I'm happy to just lay my head and rest at night. So and hang out with the boys. So, any questions, big or small, please do reach out. That's why I'm here.
Okay. And for the viewers' information, I'm putting all of our contact information down below this video. So that way you can reach any of us anytime you have a question, whether it's buying or selling a house, getting a mortgage, or taking care of your insurance needs. We can help you with all those needs. Thank you so much for watching, and y'all have a great day.
Thank you, guys.